the whole technology industry on the software side has existed because of one fundamental thing. Computers didn't understand us. And so we created a whole language in code land, in UI land, to basically help ourselves express our intent to the computer.
There's no doubt AI will be able to automate product, marketing, and sales workflows. But GenAI's greatest achievement could be expanding our creative potential. In this episode, you'll learn about how AI's ability to understand context and intent will change everything. That communicating via visuals instead of words will innovate decision-making. The differences in working in a design-led culture versus a production line organization. Preparing for a world of AI as a creative partner and provocateur, and what creative AI products can do today and in the near future.
Became as works of arts, or even inventions were almost accidental in that something led to some situation that shouldn't have existed in the first place, and boom, you have this moment of genius that happens.
Our guest, Tuhin has worked on the bleeding edge of user experience design his entire career, creating some of the most memorable interactions on Facebook, Airbnb, and Apple's platforms. In this conversation, we explore why he decided to lead design at Luma, a GenAI platform challenging our perspectives on the creative potential of video and images. As we enter an era where anyone can create average assets, we must find new ways of pushing the boundaries of creativity. Pioneers like Tuhin are building a future that equips product teams and creatives across all industries with new capabilities to innovate how we design. Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. We provide secrets for building AI products that customers love. If you have guests you want to recommend or need help with your product, contact us at info@designof.ai. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcasting app. It also really helps if you leave reviews.
Welcome, Tuhin. I am so excited to talk about creativity. It's been one of the topics that's been most requested for us. People are constantly asking, let's find out what AI can do. What happens when we push it to its creative limit? And when your name came up, I thought this is such a perfect match. Can you tell us a bit how you ended up in the realm of pushing creativity to its limit?
Long story. That is a long story. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here. I thought into design via the path of engineering. I never formally studied design. And so I got into it while studying engineering, stumbled across it because I wanted to blog of all things. And then in that process, discovered WordPress, discovered HTML, CSS, and then PHP. And then I was like, wait a minute, what was this whole process of building this thing? And I fell in love with that process way more so than the blogging itself. And that's kind of what kicked off this journey for me. From there, starting off with startups, then working through a few big companies like Facebook, Airbnb, Apple. So that's what led me eventually to Luma, especially when the AI like ChatGPT and other things started kicking in and the new AI wave started happening. Funnily enough, I had dabbled in AI pretty much since 2013. My first project in AI was at Facebook. This was graph search using natural language processing. So you could just ask things. Hey, which of my friends live in San Francisco? Anything of that sort, like very simple English-based language construction. Then after Facebook, my second attempt at AI was this company called Clara. You could just CC Clara on any email thread. Let's say you and I are trying to find a time to meet. I would just CC Clara and Clara would kind of handle the coordination back and forth between us by detecting kind of time tokens, all of this stuff. And so that seeded the idea of this fascination with AI. And especially now when we get to the point where AI can actually understand us, understand language, understand human intent, more so than humans understanding computer speak. I think for me, that is so much lower friction that we can actually start pushing at the things that humans care the most about. Creativity is one of those, I would say, fundamental pillars that I think humans really value, whether explicitly or implicitly. And so that was kind of for me the impetus of like, let's start there, especially when you start looking at like visual AI. It's one of the first applications given kind of the price, quality, latency, all those trifectas. But for me, that was partially my own background, partially fascination with AI, and then partially this moment in time that kind of led to all of this.
So was it a tough sales pitch when Luma came to you and said, hey, we want you to lead design for this new creative tool? Was it something that really called your attention immediately, or did you have some concerns about moving into such a frontier area?
So finally, when Luma came, Luma was doing 3D capture. they were basically building this app, still in the realm of creativity, so to speak, but not AI in the current form that we see it. And so it was doing things like, hey, you could capture any space using just your iPhone. And at that time, that was revolutionary. It was magic. Really, you could just scan a space and you could now be in the space. It was magical. So that's kind of was the starting point of the conversations when I started talking to Luma. Amit, the CEO and co-founder of Luma, he also worked at Apple. And so I feel like there was always this philosophical alignment. And then kind of from there, finding, okay, this is what we're doing. Here's what role I can play, help in. I think that was just a very natural progression of the conversation. Never a moment of like, oh, why would I leave Apple or why would I do this? It felt natural to me.
So you mentioned you work at some big startups, Airbnb, Facebook, Apple, but your role was always kind of an invisible one. I'm thinking this from the perspective of good design goes unnoticed except by those who notice it. How does it feel to work in a field where so much of your work perhaps isn't noticed?
That's a good question. I think I've designed a little bit differently. It's a little bit like you're all into meditation, but when you start focusing on meditation, one of the things they teach you is the duality of things. You are supposed to notice your breath, but you shouldn't be thinking about noticing your breath. And it's like one of those mind curveball things, like it is, but it is also not it is. And so I think for me, that's kind of a little bit of what invisible design feels like, in that you might not, unless you are very trained in the language of design, you might not pick up on the subtleties. But what people do, I strongly believe people pick up on is kind of the baseline attention that was put into something that comes off on the other end. And so all the things like for all the pixels, motion curves, colors, gradients, typography, I think ultimately the thing that goes on the other end is like, okay, a lot of attention and care was put into this thing. So for me, that is ultimately like design is just a means of an expression. It's the fact that we care. And as long as that's kind of passed on to the other end, I feel great. Yeah.
So how does it feel now putting design and creativity at the forefront, where your challenge is actually to equip more people to make better and more stunning creativity? How does it change this perspective on life and this duality and such?
It's definitely interesting because there are so many like layers, I would say, to this. One is the technological kind of era and the context in which this change is happening. It's very fast. It's very chaotic. Sometimes it's scary. Things are changing way too fast. So there's that kind of almost social context that is at the forefront. And then there is the kind of context of how do you build the ramp for people to kind of pick up these things and it's like tied to the hip with the social context, which is how do you make it such that this is not something people fear, but they understand it enough that they can yield it? And I think that's kind of the challenge really for me, which is how do we make it so intuitive, so simple, and yet powerful? I think there's a way of making things simple where you really like curb down the kind of power of a tool. But with AI, the ultimate input is language. And so there's like a lot of power you can yield from just that. And so how do we carve it all into like something that makes it very simple? And in case of say something like Luma, it becomes interesting of how do you take all of this, but make it something that is relevant in the creative process. What I mean by that is when you look at the general process of creativity, you start off with like maybe a nascent idea. No one really has when they start this grand idea with every detail fleshed out. Even the best artists don't have that. Like no one, no architect, no fashion designer, no artist comes up with, oh yeah, I know exactly what I need to make. They come up with a fuzzy, almost silhouette of what is in their head, or maybe an intent in some cases. And from there, there's this process of meandering and exploration that happens. I think there, the role of AI is in being a great ideation partner where can you help me where instead of me exploring 10 ideas, I can now explore 1,000 possibilities. And then when I like something, give me all the capabilities and the tool to really go deeper, really hone in the details, make it mine, like really my intent. How do I carve that into the tool or the work that I'm trying to do? So that's kind of like the whole pipeline of you start with the ideation phase and supporting that. In some ways, that's where a lot of the tools were maybe a year ago. And as the quality has increased, we've gotten into the era of like, how do we get people the kind of controls, not just mapping to the controls of the past, but maybe a little bit, what are the new controls that this unlocks? Like, what is the equivalent of an RGB slider, but in AI? Because you've always had an RGB slider. Like, if we just mimic that's like a weird skeuomorphic way of approaching the problem. But what is the equivalent of that? And like you start seeing new things like, oh, style ref is a whole other thing that you can now do. But you can control the chaos in a design, the complexity of the structure in a design. These are things you couldn't quite control from a simple slider in the past. And so those are the other aspects of what are the new kinds of controls that emerged in this medium. And so that's kind of, for me, the real challenge, and making it simple enough, because there's a way of exposing all of this, which is all the model parameters are just exposed to the end user. It's very powerful, but it's also very daunting. And so the kind of social context back there is, how do you make it simple so people are not scared of it? It feels approachable to people.
I want to go back. You use the word chaos. Now, chaos is a fundamental component of how models output. Can you explain what it is and how it can be used as a creative tool?
When I said chaos, I probably meant it a little bit more on the social context side of things. Creativity is not a linear process. It can be in a very assembly line way of working, in that, okay, you do this, then pass it on to the next person. They're the specialist at this thing. They'll go do this. But when you're looking at a small creative team, there's a lot of role overlap. But in terms of exploring ideas, there's no structured path most of the times. Like, so many famous scenes in movies, famous works of arts, or even inventions were almost accidental, in that something led to some situation that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And boom, you have this moment of genius that happens. And that's what I feel is the reflection of chaos or entropy in the act of creativity, in that you likely are getting exposed to a lot of things that your brain might not have had those neural pathways, but the model likely has them. And in the combination of the two, the human and the machine working together, you're just able to explore a lot more. Now, if it were just the machine, it has no intent of its own. It has no lived experience of its own. And so it's kind of everything, everywhere, all at once kind of situation, which at some point is, who cares? But when you add the human lived in experience, or the human intent, the human why, what is it that I am trying to express, and why does it have meaning for me? When you combine that with this kind of, I can explore so much more now, that leads to a lot more interesting process. And I think that's kind of the role of chaos, or in this context, I would say entropy is probably the better word in this act of creativity in the new age.
So let's introduce Luma. What can you do with Luma now that perhaps would blow people's minds? Because I looked at it and I was in awe of what's possible now.
Yeah, our vision with Luma is to effectively make a creative partner for you. One that can ideate with you, one that can imagine with you. And so for us, the end goal is to basically have this like end-to-end workflow, this partner that can help you all the way from your earliest ideas and ideation, all the way to giving you a final production ready asset, and everything in between, like collaborating with different teams, different partners. So like all of that in the context of creativity. And so if you think of that from, okay, that's great, but what specifically can I do? For us, we look at this through different modalities. That's like the easiest way to talk about it. When you look at it through the lens of video, which is the thing that we are most known for, there, I think a lot of the use cases revolve around anything that today is produced, whether that's films, whether that's animation, whether that's motion graphics, whether that's advertisement. There's a lot of money, effort, time, and just iteration cycles involved in getting that simple, like I would say 10-second to 30-second clip. Where Luma can help is in various stages of the pipeline. It can help in previs. So now think about this. Historically, the way ideas in film industry or even in ad industry have kind of been passed around is someone writes a script, and that script is the thing that gets passed around. And then everyone has to imagine what the thing could possibly look like by that script. This is why scripts are what get greenlit. But in this world, because you can probably get to previs much faster, it starts changing the equation of what are you using to convey the idea and the vision you have. And that likely, we hope, leads to a lot more interesting ideas coming to the forefront. On the other side, we also hope that leads to a reduction of budget that is required to produce these things. And so a lot of ideas that might have required in the past multi-million dollar budgets can likely be done with much smaller budgets now. Overall, in that realm, what you would see is like this Cambrian explosion of different ideas that can come about, because all the way from what is it that you're using to spread the idea to like how much does it actually cost, the end production cost of something, both in time and in money. And if you start lowering that, what ends up happening to the number of ideas that get produced? And so that's what you can effectively do across films, across ads, marketing. And this is the beginning. This is still looking at video through the lens of people who have historically created videos. Then when you start expanding this meaning of video from just a content like that you sit back and you watch because someone created it for you, to video as somewhat of an active medium of thinking, we start getting into realms like, say, fashion design. Now, fashion designers are not going to create video to when they're designing something. They might use it to and as an e-commerce thing to, hey, here is a video version of my cloth on a model. And that's useful for them because it shows how the cloth flows. And that's part of fashion, word building and how something flows. But when you're designing, where it can be useful is in seeing yourself, oh, this is how the fabric flows. This is how it moves. This is how it drapes. Same with architecture. If you've ever worked with architects, the cost of getting a simple render and the time it takes is insane. And the funny part is there is no structural work involved here. It's not that this needs to be something very precise to the millimeter. It's just a rough shape so that the client can kind of see, okay, this is what the house that I'm dreaming, whether you're working with an architect or interior designer, this is the house that I'm dreaming would likely look like. Well, we can now show you what walking through the house looks like. And so this is kind of the next evolution of video as an active medium of thinking. So these are things that you can do today. As we add more aspects to this, which is things become really fast, things become really cheap, you start looking at video as almost an interactive medium that starts feeling closer to games than just video itself. But this is all that you can do today with Luma. And we haven't even gotten into image side of things because that's the starting point in many cases because it's so much faster to, I want to try this idea and then this idea and then this idea. Video still is very expensive. And so we see image as the faster way to explore a lot of ideas. And then when you like something, start animating it and going deeper into the story that you're trying to tell.
Now, a lot of the investment in these tools is in coding. It's in data analysis. It's very easy to quantify inputs and outputs, but creativity is different. While those tools have a lot of hallucinations and a lot of errors, I'm assuming that's a feature, not a bug in your realm.
Yeah, absolutely. Within reason, of course. At some point, if I want to create a certain kind of world or a character with a certain kind of armor, at some point, hallucination stops being a creative aid because it's like, no, I want it to be this medieval century like armor. It needs to have this motif. It better have the motif that I'm looking for. But in the early stages, when you don't even know what kind of armor, the hallucination is effectively creativity in our process. It's just another way of, it could be this. And suddenly you see results that you're like, I never thought of that, but that is actually very interesting.
So then the other countering effect that's happening is just the herd mentality around trends. So we just recently had this whole explosion of the Ghibli style images. We know that these models have a tendency to average everything out, to bring people to a place that they think they want to be. So for you, as someone who's trying to encourage and incite creativity and create provocations, how can we use these tools and ensure these tools are still spurring new ideas and expanding possibilities rather than regressing it?
I think a good question. I think there are probably multiple layers to it. I think one of them is, where does meaning in the work come from? We kind of touched about this in the beginning, but I strongly believe the meaning in the work comes from the human at the end of the process. If your only intent is to copy a famous artist's work, good for you, but it's not particularly interesting piece of work. It likely is not going to go far. And especially in an era where anyone can do that, definitely not going to go very far with that. Like a good example of this, at least mapping to design, is you have so many of these templates that exist, or website design, blog design, they exist. And yet when it comes to actually creating unique stuff, designers are the ones creating unique things versus, everyone is just copying these things. On the tool side of things, I do think it is really important over time for these models and these tools to learn whether we look at it through the lens of memory, we look at it through the lens of personalization. This is where when you start working deeper and deeper with artists, well, what is this artist, this particular person, this creative person, what is their thing? Do they like muted color palettes? Do they like more complex structures in their designs? What's kind of their thing? And that might also change project to project. It would be amazing to come to a point where it's possible today, but we would love to kind of have some of these things in Luma where, hey, you're an artist, you have a body of work. Give us that body of work and create something that understands your worth. It's only yours, but now you can use that to create a lot more. Whether that's LoRa, whether that's new ways of thinking about these problems through the lens of personalization. But that would be the other side of this, which is instead of questioning the intent, how do we empower the intent for those who have it? And I think that in my head creates a very good situation in society where ultimately then society gets to decide that. But we have really empowered the artists and the creatives, those with unique vision, to really tell the story from, in this case, quite literally from their point of view. And that to me is what we want to focus on, which is how do we empower the creatives to give them the ways that they can express.
What do you believe is the next great frontier in creativity with LLMs? Will it be something in terms of the abstraction layer, so ontologies and the text interface, or will it be something in the form of agents that maybe are provocateurs or act as representation of specific artistic avatars? Is there something that maybe the creative community that isn't aware of?
I spend most of my time, honestly, thinking a lot more about the visual model side of things and not so much the LLM. I think for LLMs, the things I'm most curious about is that I think Sam said this recently, wherein different generations have been using LLMs differently. And especially the youngest generation is basically using LLMs almost as an OS. That's the part that I am most excited by. For like last 30, 40 years, the entire field of computers, both on the programming side, the design side, and everything in between, the whole technology industry on the software side, has existed because of one fundamental thing. Computers didn't understand us. And so we created a whole language in code land, in UI land, to basically help ourselves express our intent to the computer. Apps, UI, programs, software exists for just that one reason. Computers don't understand us. But now they can. And to me, the most interesting question on the LLM side, and in general, this whole arc of AI is, well, why do you need all of this stuff then? And more importantly, how long does it take for these things to become much more fluid and dissolve into each other? So that's on the LLM side of things. On the visual model side of things, which is where I spend most of my time and folks at Luma spend most of their time thinking about, the things that we are excited about is what would it take? We kind of solved or and are on the arc of solving the quality part of the problem, which is, can it look decent? Let's start there. Can the physics not be mangled? So we're solving the quality side of things. And then there comes the control side of things that includes things like personalization, that includes things like giving the right kind of control so that they can guide the output of AI and not just be this spray and hope the next turn gets you the output that you're looking for. So that's the second arc. I think the third arc is what we started alluding about a little bit, which is video not just as content, but video as a place for thinking and video as a medium. And there, so right now we are in the creativity arc of things. The other arcs that I'm excited about is what happens when you start getting into the arc of curiosity. Why does everything need to be told through words? A lot of things can be shown. What does that start to look like? What does really, like in this case, visual agents, what do they look like? Even that word, what imagery does it produce for us? From there, you immediately get to the arc. That's like the curiosity arc, I would say. Then you have this arc of connection and companionship of sorts, where how can you have different kinds of quote unquote connection with an entity on the other side? There are so many relationships we have, everything from a friend to parents, to teachers, to a coach, to a therapist, to a pet, to a plant. This whole spectrum of relationships, which of these does it make sense to imbue on an artificial thing? Which of these things doesn't make sense to imbue on an artificial thing? So I think that is going to be super interesting. And then lastly, especially on the video side, as these things get really, really, really fast. Interactivity is not something that you click and because it's a video model, it comes and minutes later. It happens instantly in like milliseconds. You do start to get into this world of truly interactive video. And to me, the question that is the most interesting one there is what kind of worlds do people imagine and what kind of use cases emerge from there where these are these micro worlds and what all can people do? Is this a new kind of experience layer that is almost replacing what is the app layer today? Because we have gone one level up in what computing can enable. In some ways, software before a lot of like heavyweight GUI was mostly text-based. And then computers got enough processing power that they could render these UIs, do fancy animations, have capacitive touch. When you go one level above that in intelligence and processing power, fully real-time interactive video powered stuff, what is that? What is that like? And what does it unlock for general purpose computing, not just games? And so those are kind of the different domains that I'm most excited by and the questions that intrigue me.
You mentioned artificial things. Now, one of the most artificial things is the assembly line, the production workflows. You've worked inside of big, humongous design teams. Is there space for creativity and very divergent thinking in these organizations that are more and more becoming rule-based and really trying to structure everything amongst how it has to be, not what it could be?
That is another deep question. And I don't know if I have a straight line answer to it. I think it depends a little bit on the kind of company that you're trying to be and the kind of people who are in the company. All in all, it depends on the context and the environment. It's obviously like way easier to do this when you're small. So almost every startup that I worked at, you almost can't afford to be an assembly line because assembly lines make sense when you have a clear thing that you're producing. You just need to have a repeatable process. In startups and small companies, especially in AI, what that thing is changes quite frequently because it's evolving at such a fast pace. Now, you look at little larger, more mature companies, yeah, that thing is kind of constant. And there it depends on the environment. Luckily for me, both Airbnb and Apple were kinds of places that really, truly believe in allowing for this divergent thinking. You almost have to go in and explore and look at the problem from many different angles. And then, of course, you could totally be that the other angles are non-traditional angles for a reason, in that there is some acceptable envelope of what society will even accept, even in novel things. And that's okay. It honestly depends on the environment that you are in. It is like true that a lot of companies, especially bigger ones today, do feel a little bit like that. It's particularly funny to me in that that is exactly the kind of thing that eventually AI is actually very ripe to automate away. Whereas when you start thinking a lot more divergently, thinking about the creative process, okay, what things can be, how does it solve the human condition? Beyond a point, that is harder to just automate or try to automate because there will always be a faction of society that will try to automate everything because, it leads to lower costs. It's as simple as that. That's where some balance of, well, surround yourself with people who really value that. Keep yourself in contexts and environments where that kind of thinking is encouraged. And then true value, deliver this divergent thinking.
That's wonderful. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of designers who are in those situations. Maybe they're inspired. Maybe at the same time, they're feeling a little overwhelmed by everything. What advice can you give them about expanding their creative selves in a time when they're being told that they just need to be faster with less? What advice can you give them in terms of how to introduce these tools into organizations that perhaps are a little reticent? How can you encourage them to shift their cultures a little bit, little by little?
I would start with, it will seem like such a cliche answer. I would start with just be curious, like be genuinely curious about these things. I think it's like one thing to try these things because there's some level of anxiety or almost FOMO that you have about these new tools coming out. But the people who generally end up being more successful with these tools are people who are just generally curious about these things. Like, oh, there's this new thing. Let me go check it out. Like, not with some like, oh, it will help me be more productive. Maybe. Or maybe you will hate working in it. We don't know. But just go with an open mind and try these things. See which part of these can fit in which part of your workflow. You don't have to overnight just switch everything. It could be that you use these to create FPO graphics to start off. This is where you start off, where instead of keeping it blank or gray, you have images that are in place as, they're just for placement. Maybe that's your starting point. Maybe your starting point could be you are really good at the static visual medium, but now you can add just that extra level of motion to really bring life to your creations. Maybe that's the place where you start. Maybe the place where you start is, oh, you've been really good at creating these prototypes in Figma, but now you want to go to the next level, and maybe you start with white coding, playing with cursor, V0, whatever it may be, or now I guess writing Figma. But that's where you want to start. So don't go in and try to do everything. See what draws you first. Try those. See which part of those you can incorporate, and then kind of move on. You'll likely stick with the thing for longer, and you will integrate it in your process in a way that is honest to your own process of creativity. So yeah, just be curious and approach these things with honest curiosity.
The irony of that is you're kind of saying it's good to wait time because that's when new creative possibilities happen. But before we let you go, I'd love to know, what are some AI products that you're excited about? Ones that you encourage people to check out, either because of what they can do or how they're built or what you can do with them, perhaps. Maybe it doesn't have to be very functional. It could be just experimental.
I love, of course, Luma. If you haven't checked out Luma and Dream Machine, wink, wink, this is your call to go check it out. I think outside of that, there's so many. I would say the two that are not your regular, the chat GPTs of the world. The two for me, one is Granola. I love it. I think it's really powerful. How simple it is. I just love that aspect of it. It solves a very specific problem and doesn't try to get in the way. I love that. The other one, I have been fascinated by, you have this thing that for the first time, you can ask it anything, what kind of forms we can give. And so there's an app called Tuhin, Tuhin. They make these really simple animated avatars. And I think they work with illustrators to really bring these things to life. And each of them has a specific personality. You kind of give a quiz to really understand which one is right for you. I think the idea of that is fascinating. The reason that is exciting to me personally is less like some productivity or anything like that. For me, it's very much that idea of computing being just a little more fun, kind of literally moving outside the bounds of these rectangles. And what does it mean when these kinds of entities can come and be in our computing environments? And to me, that is an intriguing thread to pull on. So that's kind of why Tuhin makes the list. I will say I do love ChatGPT. I think I use it for a bajillion use cases, none of which are really productivity based. I read books and I have all these weird questions of what about this connection with this other concept that I read in this other book. And it's so far been amazing to use it as this meta engine to process input signals of the world. But less about productivity, to be honest, more just weird curiosity. That's my use case of ChatGPT.
Well, thank you so much, Tuhin. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for reminding us that we don't need to be productive all times, that sometimes being creative is just wasting time in the most fun way possible.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
This episode was hosted by RPJ Figueredo, the founder and principal strategist at PH1 Research. If you want more AI strategy and research content, subscribe to our Substack newsletter at designofai.substack.com. This episode is brought to you by PH1 Research, a research and strategy consultancy specialized in mapping the future of your business and product. Get more information at ph1.ca.